That's why, and now look at Philippians 3, because Paul, this was a big topic in the book of Philippians. So I want to move to a second passage, because basically what he's saying is that progressive sanctification, or personal sanctification, or grace-energized living, is a lifelong pursuit at Christ-likeness. And so look at chapter 3, because he talks about the pursuit part of it, starting in verse 12. When Paul describes his life, he says in Philippians 3:12 that he is, verse 12, pressing. Not that I've already attained or already perfect, but I press on. And he describes himself, and the word he uses here is an athletic word. It's a word for an Olympic sprinter. Now, the Olympics are coming up again, in China before long. And if you get by your television set and they've got a good angle, you will see the intense, every thread and fiber of the body of the sprinter is just totally directed toward that goal. Certainly not on an escalator. Certainly not sitting at the starting blocks and saying, God, get me there. Which is how some Christians view the Christian life. They get up to the starting blocks and the race is ahead of them, and they say, bang, the gun goes off. They say, okay, God, get me there. And nothing is happening. They didn't read Paul. Look what he says. He says, I am pressing. It's an aggressive, energetic push toward a goal. And Paul pursued sanctification with all his might, and he strained every spiritual muscle he had to gain the prize. He says, I want to lay hold of that in verse 12, for which Jesus Christ has laid hold of me. Verse 13, brethren, believers, I don't count myself to be already there, but one thing I do, I forget the things which are behind, and I strain and reach forward to the things which are ahead. Was Paul aggressively, actively involved in his personal sanctification? He certainly was. I mean, he's the one that said in 1 Corinthians 9 that he beats himself down. He didn't say, God beat me down. He says, I beat myself, my flesh down. He says, I don't want to be disqualified. He aggressively was reaching forward. When Paul uses the same word in verse 13 he used in verse 12, to lay hold of, he effectively reduced his whole personal sanctification plan to the simple and clear goal of doing one thing. He said, my life is a lifelong pursuit of Christ-likeness. He says, everything, every part of my entire being is straining toward that one goal. I want to be like Jesus Christ. I am pursuing Christ-likeness. Notice what he says, though. He doesn't rely on his past accomplishments. He says he doesn't count himself to have apprehended just because he's had all the great things he had. He got to see heaven, and he got to write the scriptures, and he got to talk to the Lord face to face. And he says, I don't lean back on those. He says, I forget the things which are behind. I don't rely on my past achievements. I follow the Lord. I don't dwell on my past, even my sins and failures. He says, I am in the present tense. I am consciously, fervently pressing toward that goal of Christ. Each day we're faced with one goal for our lives, to stretch every part of our life and every minute of our day toward being like Christ in our attitude and behavior. And that was Paul's goal.